Presenting Rajesh Ranjan, the author of numerous horizontal and international specific reports, including next generation BPS themes such as analytics, automation, and innovation. He leads Everest Group's business process services, published research, and custom decision support practice globally. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Rajesh Ranjan, partner at Everest Group, who will be presenting on the topic Don't Break, Drift the Curve as you move into 2021 and beyond.
Thanks for joining this session. What I have for you during this session is to kind of talk through why we believe this is the right time to not break, but drift the curve and bring the HR transformation and the employee experience that we always wanted to kind of bring for employees, for HR organization. So I'll start with this famous quote from Warren Buffett. Only when the tide goes out do you discover who has been swimming naked. And friends, COVID caused the tide to go out. And we all know that the impact of COVID has been severe. Global GDP contracted or expected to contract by 5.2%. World trade is expected to fall by anything between 13 to 32%. Job losses, business viability, so on and so forth. And as with all of these are happening, clearly, organizations are under significant pressure to change. And for sure, as we looked into the top business concerns of several organizations, the need to change and accelerate the change of their business model was paramount. Right? Moving from the legacy to digital and fully owning digital is an imperative, became an imperative. But as all the other things were happening, as you can see, talent continues to be a key concern area even during the COVID crisis. And as you kind of think about the global 2000 organizations and look at what CEOs are kind of talking about, yes, they are talking about the revenues and models and so on and so forth. They're equally talking about the need to ensure that the talent employees are taken care of from a, not only health and wellness perspective, but they are also kind of really concerned about their productivity, their engagement, so on and so forth. Now, as you kind of think about this, HR organizations have a kind of a difficult task to kind of manage, and more so for those organizations who have been slow to change, who have been operating in a traditional HR operating model that is, anchored around physical presence, that is anchored around fractured and manual processes, saddled with legacy systems. Now, that HR organization is now tasked to engage employees and talent who have gone fully virtual, fully distributed. Right? They need to kind of think about and make sure that the right tools are available for those employees to be productive. Not only productive, as we all know, this is a time where things are changing very fast. So not only they got to kind of make sure they are productive, they also need to ensure that they have the right tools to learn and relearn to respond to some of these fast changing environment. And while all these things are happening, ought to ensure that the ongoing operations run smoothly. You got to kind of process the payroll on time. You got to kind of do whatever that is required from a regulatory and compliance perspective. You can't have slip-ups there. Right? Now, this is no easy task if you haven't kind of changed or you haven't kind of embraced what we have been talking for some time now. But a lot of organizations, honestly, have paid a lip service to that. And by the way, as I kind of talked about this environment, this is not something which is temporary, and COVID is as COVID kind of vanishes, this is going to go away. So we did this survey to kind of figure out what will be the likelihood of work from home post COVID. Right? This is a post COVID world. As you can see, nearly 30 to 35% of the workforce is expected to primarily work from home, even in the next normal as well. Right? And if we take into account the hybrid model in terms of mix of work from home and work from office model on a rotation basis, that goes as high as 60%. So again, this is something which is here to stay. And as I talked about, as we kind of surveyed a lot of these enterprises, some of the most concerning areas are around assimilating new hires. 68% kind of really worry about that. I talked about the employee engagement. 63% are concerned about and kind of working through how to make sure that they build and sustain high employee engagement. How do they continue to provide, again, the right kind of interventions, tools, what have you, to help their employees, their talent, learn and develop skill sets that are really required to succeed. So as all of these things are happening, right, there are few key implications for organizations. The first one is really around rethinking their service delivery and location model. Right? Earlier we had this offshore and onshore, nearshore kind of a model, right? Somebody would say hub and spoke kind of model in certain cases, but now we see the rise of hub, spoke, and edge model. Right? Because we are not only talking about the office environment, a centralized way to kind of provide those services and have the employees come in or HR folks come in. We have the work from home element. We have the hybrid element across both offshore, onshore, and nearshore locations. And again, this is not easy because there are these countervailing factors that are playing out as one needs to think about their location strategy, their way to kind of provide services. Because on one side, you have a lot of pressure in terms of reducing the cost. Right? At the same time, we have this rising unemployment and protectionist sentiments. Right? We have on one side, we have an opportunity to accelerate automated adoption. At the same time, there's a greater demand for complex skills. Right? So net of that is design shoring. Is a critical element for organizations to think about and achieve, with a strong focus on what we are calling it de-densifying location portfolio. Then the other imperative is around digital, right? Cloud and automation are really the key imperatives in the HR services market. And as you can see from some of these charts, the adoption has been increasing, right? And by the way, this data is till the first half of 2020. Where we sit here now, we see some of these trends accelerating in a very fast way. COVID has necessitated that these adoption happen faster than ever. Honestly, we won't have choice. If you're not doing it, then I mean, we will be left way too behind. That's why I'm calling it, it's an imperative. We don't have a choice. Now, as we think about automation, just to kind of do a double click on automation part of the picture, right? Clearly, a lot of times the focus goes on productivity, focus goes on cost, and these are really important objectives as organizations try to kind of drive more automation urgency in their organization. Having said that, we also see, especially more sophisticated organizations who are kind of thinking beyond just the productivity and cost part of the equation, to think about how can it enhances employee experience, right? How does it kind of really enable and empower the employees, so that they can give their best, irrespective the the kind of environment that we find ourselves, or the environment that kind of changes. So point is, as we kind of think about automation, focus on experience beyond productivity and cost is very important. And as we see, some of these organizations who are on the forefront of it, kind of thinking in that ways. So if we again kind of think about where are we, right? So we said, hey, this is the traditional HR model, right? So we have the transactional processes, some of the judgment intensive processes, strategic processes in any of the HR setup. Okay? Typically, in some of these traditional HR operating model, we have multiple HR systems, right? We have multiple HR systems. Some of them are best of breed. Some of them are legacy, but invariably they are just cobbled together with each other. The extent of information flow, the extent of data flow that is required to create the right kind of a experience, that is clearly missing. So on top of it, we have the multiple systems that employees or even HR organization has to kind of deal with. You have fragmented databases. So what we have from an analytics standpoint is nothing but reporting, descriptive analytics. These are nothing but, it'll tell you what has happened, right? Post facto information. But what is needed is, again, what is going to happen, and what should HR organization or employee should be doing to manage those. And that is the place where at the end of it, it creates a poor employee experience. Yes, you can kind of provide a mobile interface, or you can provide some other interface. You can say, hey, I am on this self-service journey. But unless we have these fragmentation that exist, it is very, very difficult to create a seamless experience. In addition to that, what it also does is it kind of increases the volume of transactional work, and a lot of our energies are wasted in processing these transactional work. So again, less time is available to the HR organization to really kind of focus on what they should be focusing on, which is again around the talent part of the equation, talent mentoring, talent acquisition, the talent development, and overall talent engagement. Of course, there's this entire element of linking the HR to the business imperative, business objectives. Again, if we have this kind of a HR operating model, that becomes a pipe dream, right? And increasingly, as we all know, that is again becoming a core requirement from the C-suite, from the CEOs, to bring that kind of value from the HR organization. So as we are kind of struggling with all these issues, what is the kind of a next gen, what is the operating HR model that we should be kind of thinking about, right? And that is the place where it requires us to kind of take a step back and rethink, right? Because there are multiple elements that we need to kind of put together, but it is possible. And the way we kind of describe that is through what we call a 5D model, right? Which has kind of starts with a design thinking, right? And design thinking is something when we ought to put the employee at the front and center of how we kind of think about designing the process, designing the, and then kind of layering the tools, technology, so on and so forth, right? So the first is the design thinking. The second is really the power of digital that we all talk about, but again, I said earlier, not being able to kind of make as much progress as probably we should. Because as we kind of think about the second D of digital, it calls for not only automating a lot of the transactional processes that we talked about, right, through the intervention of RPA and IVA and so on and so forth, it also calls for eliminating a lot of these transactional processes through predictive AI, where you don't need to kind of even automate it. You just eliminate that. And part of the elimination is also about the self-service tools and mechanism, but not the legacy self-service which we have been talking about. Really immersive self-service, right? The Amazon experience or Uber experience. If you can provide that to our employees, again, a lot of these transactional processes are eliminated or addressed in a much more efficient fashion. The third is really around data. And again, once you have these multiple silos that I talked about in terms of the organization they find themselves kind of collapse, you have an opportunity to really unlock the power of data. Now that is the place where the people analytics kind of play in. And that is the place where the predictive and the prescriptive part of the analytics start to kind of play in. Right? The last two Ds of the 5 Ds that talked about are equally important, but both of them actually deal with the human part of it. Right? The fourth D is domain, and the fifth D is distributed workforce. Because as I talked about, once we eliminate a lot of these transactional processes, once we kind of enable the employees with the right kind of tools, what is left is those elements where we can really add value to the business as well as to employees, right? Then we are kind of dealing with those issues that employees really kind of care about, where they need guidance, where they need support. And that requires a domain knowledge that is significantly higher compared to the past. So that's the D. And then the other part is, again, this distributed workforce that I talked about, because the environment, the new environment calls for a distributed workforce, leveraging a distributed workforce, both from a location perspective as well as talent mix perspective. Because again, the environment that we find ourselves, we expect the rise of gig workforce at a much more rapid pace compared to the past. Right? So while I talked about quite a few things, as we kind of take a step back and think about it, a lot of these are interlinked to each other. But to kind of make that happen, the key thing that needs to happen is a mindset shift, right? And there's no better time to change the mindset than during a crisis. As Winston Churchill famously said, never let a crisis go to waste. And this is one of those opportunities where instead of kind of thinking about, hey, I don't have those resources, or can I do that? We are kind of limited by our mindset. As I said earlier, we ought to kind of move forward, and we ought to move forward in a manner which is transformative, but transformative in a way that is really, really important, really, really, really an imperative. Because while the COVID, what happened was a kind of black swan event, some of these events can happen again, as we saw in certain places. We don't know it's going to go away. Yes, there are going to be vaccines, but the point is that there are other calamities or other things can happen. We can't let this bog us down again. So we got to what we call drift the curve through the new HR operating model. And this is the time that we got to do it. Okay, so with that, this is what I wanted to kind of share. Let me see if we have any questions. Okay, quite a few questions. Look, let me start with one of them. It says, hey, which are the top 3 barriers to HR transformations? Your recommendations. Okay, good. In a way, I was trying to kind of mention that to me, the first and foremost is actually the mindset. Right? I mean, it's not about the tools and technologies and so on and so forth. Honestly, those are available. It's about the belief and the conviction that we got to change, and we got to change in a more fundamental way than incremental way. That is the first thing, right? Once we have that mindset change coming right at the top, and and then kind of percolate that within the organization, then things will happen. And that is the place where the second part kicks in, which is the change management part of it, right? Especially for HR, because it's not about changing the way HR operates, because this is going to be a change which is going to impact the entire organization. Every employee is going to be impacted by that. So how do we kind of go through this entire change management part of the equation? That becomes important. And the third thing is really, I would say, kind of a buy-in right from the top, right? Which is kind of goes to the, the mindset part. But when I was talking the mindset part, I was kind of really calling on to the HR organization. I think the C-suite now realize, and definitely, and at least in my conversation, all those things, they realize that they need to kind of make it happen, right? So to me, again, the three barriers are the mindset, the change management, or our ability to kind of work through the change management in a manner that is right. And the third thing is really kind of, I wouldn't call it a barrier, but nonetheless getting the kind of buy-in from the top. I mean, I would say that's not a barrier anymore, but no, these are the things. I don't think the tools and technologies and other things are kind of barrier. They are actually, enablers. How should CHROs work with the rest of the C-suite to sustain employee productivity engagement? I think the first and foremost, the way we look at it is got to kind of rely on data, right? I mean, the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, these guys that are kind of that CHRO got to engage with, one of their, I wouldn't call it kind of a frustration, but what they want from CHRO is kind of bring the right kind of a data onto the table, bring the right kind of insights on the table so that we can take effective decisions, right? So I can kind of talk about a lot of these things, but bringing the data, and the data that actually is tied to the business imperative, is tied to the employee imperative, because these two are closely linked, and our ability to kind of link these two is critical for CHROs to work with the C-suite. How much can that also, can you give me an example of what processes can just be eliminated, right? I mean, I would say HR has kind of full of a lot of those opportunities, honestly, right? Just a kind of an example of, let's say, the pay, when you process payroll, and then there are some changes in the when employees are getting the usual pay slip, I mean the same pay slip every month, they generally don't have any question, right? But anytime it changes, they will have a lot of questions. And typically what you do is kind of you kind of pick up the phone, you look at FAQ, you don't get the answer, you pick up the phone, you talk. How about proactively highlighting the change in the pay slip that employee is going to see, and also providing them a double click view on that? I mean, that will completely eliminate that part of the equation as well itself. And there are a lot of these examples, right? So I mean, part of that is kind of limited by imagination, because from a tools and technology perspective, there are quite a few options that are available. Okay, the last question is: the increasing remote nature of work has potential to unlock a global workforce. Companies who previously had not tapped into the global talent pool, what advice would you have companies to do, looking to do that? Absolutely, right? This is, I mean, part of that is going to be, again, what is our, I mean, some of the things which are kind of fundamental in nature, right? The fundamental nature is our employer value proposition, irrespective of where we want to kind of, what kind of talent that we want to engage with, and so on and so forth, continues to remain very, very important, right? And that's not only in terms of what is there on the slides or the website, but again, what kind of experience are they going to get once they join? What kind of advocacy that you have within the organization, right? So that your employees can kind of talk about a lot of good things for the potential employees to kind of tap into. But the other thing is, as we look into kind of tapping into the global talent pool, some of our policies and processes and some of the norms from a security standpoint, all those things need not be diluted, but need to kind of contextualized accordingly, right? Because yes, there are a lot of great talent that is available, which potentially is kind of opening up in a big way, because now work can be done anywhere. Thanks again for really your time today, morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much.